It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. And tonight we are having Steve, the bodyguard, on from Protection from Abuse. And I'm just waiting to make sure that he gets on. We did a little test a few minutes ago. Let me check and see if he's here. Um, Here he is. Okay, inviting you on.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
All right.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for coming on. So Steve is one of the people, like, we started a baby TikTok account at the end of December, and somebody sent me the way that Steve and I connected is somebody sent me this incredible video that I had reposted here, which was basically an open letter to Kanye West, I think it was, and it went viral. So Steve, tell us a little bit about that video and also why you decided to do that.
Well, I definitely didn't have any delusions that it would reach Kanye. I was, and I'm loath to do this because domestic violence is something suffered by millions around the world every day, and it seems we only pay attention to it when it involves a celebrity or, a chosen one in the media. And it was one of the few times where I used a high-profile case to send a larger message to start a discussion, to highlight a lot of the dysfunctional dynamics that occur in a relationship or occur during or after a breakup that many people take as normal that are not normal. And, trying to shift that prism and make people see how this could be stalking, harassment, illegal conduct, and even scary to many women.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. All right, so do you want to before we even get into the whole thing, I forgot to say you should introduce yourself and tell us a tiny bit about your background.
Okay, well, my name is Steve Dana. I am the founder and CEO of a 501c3 nonprofit that began, back in late 2015 called Protection from Abuse. My background is executive and dignitary protection and also a good long career managing litigation as well. In 2015, I decided to take my tradecraft and essentially apply it and give it to the people that I felt needed it the most.
Okay, awesome. And so now tell me about that insane statistic that we discussed when we first met. What do 8 out of 10 women do?
Underestimate their risk. When we connect with a survivor or a victim, and both of those terms have meaning. So if I use the term victim, it is not meant as disrespectful to survivors, but of course, if you're in the court system, of course, that term has meaning. So oftentimes I'll use victim survivor, but when we connect with victim survivors and we want to responsibly and professionally talk about safety and security, it's necessary to engage in certain assessments. And one of the common assessments we routinely engage in, depending on the circumstances, is a domestic violence risk assessment. And there are several iterations or instruments, domestic violence assessment instruments out there. One of the ones we use is the danger assessment. And I have probably done, by this time now, a couple of thousand of those. So we've got a lot of great insight into that process and the information gleaned from that. But one thing that jumped out at me right away, a couple hundred into the process, was that most women were underestimating their risk. And I started keeping statistics, and it turned out to be about 8 out of 10 women underestimated the danger they're in. And that's notwithstanding the fact that on the danger assessment in particular, there is a question that says, do you think he's capable of killing you? And these same women would answer yes, but then at the end I would say, well, what do you think your risk level is? Do you think it's low, medium, high? What's your sense of your risk? And they would always underestimate it 8 out of 10 times below their actual score. So that really drove home the point to me, among the other benefits of a risk assessment, how important that process is to calibrate victims and survivors to their situation, to the dynamics of the relationship, the potential danger that they're in or may be in. So very valuable process.
You're giving me flashbacks because I know it had been about 1.9 years after I had finally got my ex out, and some of my neighbors had said they'd seen him parked in our neighborhood, and so was a police officer. And Steve, can you still hear me? It looks like you're spinning on the screen. Did you disconnect for a second?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit on me.
Okay, so I was saying that it was 1.9 years after my ex finally left, and my neighbors were telling me, because we have a pretty close neighborhood, that they had seen him parked outside. I had seen him parked outside, and so a friend of mine who was also a neighbor and a retired police officer who knew a lot about domestic violence because he started the special victims unit in our police department. I was like, I want to ask you a question. Like, do you think that there's anything to worry about? I feel there shouldn't be because it's been so long since he's been out of the house. And he said, absolutely. I'm going to send a police officer over because the fact that he's in the neighborhood, he has no contact with the kids, and he lives in another state, like your risk is high. And they had me do something called a LAP screening, which is like a lethal assessment test. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions on there, they said there were two that immediately put you to the top of the list as being high risk. And one was, has the person ever threatened to kill you? And mine was yes, that was the answer. But in my head, I thought, well, that was a long time ago. Or, that was when we were still together, so it almost doesn't count. So I can completely relate to what you're saying. So I would have been one of those 8 in 10 women who also thought, well, it's probably okay.
We're probably jumping ahead, but these instruments are misused all the time. You weren't necessarily wrong. There is a temporal or time relationship between conduct that's happened and how far we are into the future. And generally speaking, it's not impossible that something happened 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later, depending on, the threat landscape and what's going on between the two people. But generally we see people age out of that real dangerousness. So there is a temporal component to it. So we're looking, when we look at threats to kill in particular, they're very difficult to distinguish between threats to kill that are threats to control, because threats to kill, listen, if I can make you afraid of me, I can control you. And they're very difficult to distinguish from threats to kill that are meant as a serious threat and a potential warning sign. But you are correct. It's usually a lethality, a question on most lethality screenings. It's absolutely relevant. All threats to kill should be taken seriously, but all threats to kill, quite frankly, are not equal. I can tell you, sitting out listen, some people get curious and they show up and they want to know what somebody's up to. And that becomes difficult to distinguish from what we call pre-attack indicators. And if I want to plan an attack on somebody, I have to know where they live. I have to know their routine. And, a lot of people are really good with home security. So the best time to really attack somebody is when they're out and about in the community or when they're coming to or going to their house. So that type of stalking can be a pre-attack indicator, or it can just be simple curiosity. The point of the matter is, all of this requires professional analysis, right? It requires professional guidance, but it's important to recognize, I think when, the dialogue surrounding the Kanye West behavior, a lot of people try to excuse it as a man trying to win back his family. And he has a right to try to win back his family, and he's fighting for his family, not understanding that a lot of that behavior is stalking behavior, and it can be dangerous. But it is difficult to distinguish between the two, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's like that just shows how professionals who know more have to be the ones who judge how dangerous someone is. Right. Okay, so we also talked a little bit about how family lawyers don't really understand the dynamics of domestic violence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm just I don't have too much on that other than some of the most uninformed comments made to victims and survivors I've heard uttered out of family law attorneys in court, usually during restraining orders. I would say 99.9% of them have no formal training with respect to any kind of victim advocacy. They may be great lawyers, but they're not they're not they're not schooled in actually dealing with victims and survivors. So, there's a tendency that the whole process is a re-victimization of sorts. And then you have attorneys that are representing the victim or survivor making offhanded comments that are actually re-victimizing and judgmental and just really uninformed. And I've seen that repeatedly
Yeah.
before. And
I was going to say, you want to give a couple of examples? I'm wondering if it's the kind of things I've heard.
we were back and forth on a particularly dangerous case. It was it was a restraining order hearing that I think we had 6, 7, separate hearings. So we were back and forth to court. My organization, we provide, protective custody, if you will, back and forth to court when there is that threat, so that their location can't be found, and also because you're not safe just because you're going to court. Violence happens in court. Violence routinely happens outside of the courthouse or on the way to the courthouse. So we provide that protective custody, and I'm in court all the time because of that. And it was a difficult case. And he said to her, what do you, next time, when we get past this, something like use your head, what are you doing with a guy like this? How'd you get yourself in this situation? It was something very judgmental. And I just, I was horrified. But I understand it, right? If we have empathy, and I think we should have empathy for even, we don't want to be triggered, because triggering doesn't accomplish anything, right? We want to have empathy, and we want to educate. And there was a time probably where I stood in those shoes, like a lot of people. That's their first reaction to domestic violence. Why don't you just leave? How could you be with that person? Those are normal reactions to people that aren't educated on the actual complexities and the dynamics. But I was surprised that it was coming from an attorney that routinely handles divorce and restraining orders. And if you routinely handle divorce and restraining orders, you are routinely and repeatedly going to run up against domestic violence. So it was a shocker for me, but it's certainly not rare. It's one I hear a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as you were giving some of those examples, I myself heard comments like that made. And what you said about lawyers not being trained, I mean, that's my partner, Chris, and I actually we trained lawyers internationally on coercive control in Barbados, because our partner organization there, Operation Safe Space, said how important it is for lawyers to understand the clients that will be coming their way, to know what they're dealing with, and to understand why somebody might talk really fast or why they react certain ways, and to have that kind of sympathy, which hopefully becomes empathy.
Right, to understand the trauma response. But, and I've seen a lot of horse trading, if you will, over restraining orders and moving them over to civil restraints without any regard for what the real safety risks are. They're just in court horse trading, trying to reach a resolution. And I'm not saying that resolution is always bad, but you can't start trading legal protections that matter for civil restraints and trying to reach a negotiated outcome when you don't understand first the level of danger, or the dynamics and the danger that the offender is potentially presenting. And we run up against that all the time. They settled for a civil restraint, which is, there's no criminal violation for violating a criminal restraint, so it has no teeth. And I hate this expression because people often say this, too often for my taste, a restraining order is only a piece of paper. That's not true at all. A restraining order confers some very important legal rights and potential benefits and access to services, such as the Victims' Compensation Fund in your state. But, I am of the opinion that these civil restraints, they really are just a piece of paper, because they have no criminal repercussions at all. They have no, there's nothing to enforce them, except maybe to go back to civil court, which, I think a lot of the times, if you're in the position where you feel you need a restraining order, to settle for something like a civil restraint is often a mistake.
Yeah, interesting. And it really stood out to me what you just said about orders without teeth, because that I don't have a restraining order issue, but I have 90-something court appearances in the last several years trying to get enforcement of orders on paper where nothing happens. And people, any kind of abuser who who experiences no consequences to his or her actions, it just emboldens them
Right.
because they see, if I can keep getting away with this, I can escalate it.
Right. And then they
and they still have that control.
and and then if they have the resources, and even some of them that don't, they can use the court system to keep victimizing you by bringing you back and forth to court. And we've seen that time and time again, where people abuse the restraining order process, or just drag out the divorce process, or child custody, or visitation, and want to march back and forth to court for any little thing that two normal, healthy people, reasonable adults, should be able to work out between themselves. So that's another form of abuse, but the court system is ill-equipped to respond to that, because it's hard to distinguish between, somebody does have a right to go to court when they have a grievance, right? It's hard to distinguish when that is just a pattern of harassment or another form of abuse. So, courts are ill-equipped to deal with a lot of these issues, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I forgot to tell you that we actually started a year ago a legal abuse support group for that very reason.
Yeah.
So it's very, very familiar to us. Okay, so now let's talk about, in your past, you were babysitting rich people, you said, and how did that lead to your nonprofit, the protection from abuse?
It's actually the reason I had two careers. My main career was always, risk management and litigation management. I always had a security firm for almost the same amount of time in providing dignitary or executive protection throughout the years, but never, except on a few limited occasions, pursued it full time, because, quite frankly, it felt beneath me. When you provide executive protection to a single client, you're basically living their life. You're following them around, for the duration of your shift, and you're not really living much of your own life. Some think that's glamorous, particularly if it's with a celebrity or a high net worth person. I don't share that opinion. And quite frankly, the people that can afford it the most often need it the least. An attack on a celebrity, an assassination attempt on a celebrity or an executive or a high net worth person, in the grand scheme of things, is exceedingly rare. By contrast, we lose several thousand women a year in the United States alone to domestic violence, which, in my opinion, and this is an angle that I've taken with it to educate, actually leaving an abusive or a potentially dangerous partner is the world's most dangerous job, literally. Mm-hmm. There's no other occupation. If leaving a dangerous abuser was a job, if it was an occupation, it would be the most dangerous one in the world. There's no other occupation that produces several thousand deaths per year. Not police officer, not fisherman, not logger, not roofer, not anything in transportation. It just doesn't happen. But for some reason, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting.
So when I say, my tradecraft is now being put where it's needed, that's literally the case. The people that can least afford it are the ones that actually need the protection.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us a little more, why is risk and threat assessment so important?
Well, it's the foundation of all planning that's going to follow. You can't, if you look at properly safety planning, if you will, or security as a series of mitigations, right? Mitigation is what you're doing to address a potential vulnerability. Well, you don't know what those vulnerabilities are unless you engage in various assessments. Now, that assessment could be something like a lethality assessment to better understand the dynamics of the relationship, the dynamics of the offender in particular. We can engage in threat assessment, which is really a hyper-focused look at the offender themselves, or even something as simple as home security. It has to start with an assessment. You have to know what your vulnerabilities are to properly address those vulnerabilities. So, typically, from what I've seen in the landscape, safety planning in domestic violence is a hodgepodge of oft repeated safety advice or checklist, and that's not good enough. And a lot of times the wrong safety advice might be right in one circumstance, but is absolutely wrong in another. So
Can you give a couple of examples with that?
A big one, a big mistake we see over and over again is, victims or survivors moving for safety purposes without doing all the pre-work that's necessary to stay confidential, right? So let's say you move for safety purposes. Well, in this day and age with the internet and data brokers, it's not hard to find somebody. Sometimes it's just a simple Google search. But if I'm willing to pay a fee, I'm going to get deeper information. If I'm willing to engage a PI, I'm going to get that information. So if you don't do things properly, you're going to show up on the internet. You're going to show up in a database within a matter of a few months. You're going to be found. So number one, you have to take advantage of your state's confidential address program, but you need to do things in the proper order. If you just move, for instance, without making sure your electronic devices are free from their own tracking devices or viruses or stalking, where it's going to lead the offender right there. Let's say you don't have your vehicle. This is something else we do for victims. We sweep their vehicles for GPS. Let's say you moved and you didn't know you had a tracker on, and now you've led your offender. Now they know exactly where you are. And the problem is, we're often, with the legal situation, the situation in its entirety, we're not typically dealing with high net worth people. We're dealing with people with limited resources. And even if they enjoyed a good standard of living prior to the breakup, 9 times out of 10, they've been isolated from the income or the family assets because they're fighting about these things in court. They're fighting about support and so forth. And you're only going to get one bite at the apple, usually, to move confidentially. So you only get one time to blow it. You blow it, the offender still knows where you are, and now you can't move again. So you didn't engage in that one simple process. But it's a major it's a major tool in our tool belt to help keep somebody safe, is that confidential relocation. So everything along this continuum has to be done properly, has to be done in the right order. Another one I see in this company, law enforcement, absolutely, and this is not a knock on law enforcement. Law enforcement gives some of the worst safety advice I've heard. And law enforcement has no formal training in actually protecting people. They've got no training in executive or dignitary protection. That is a separate tradecraft. They have training in policing. They have absolutely, unless they were on a mayor detail or a governor detail where they were sent for special training, they just don't have that background. So you'll hear things that come from my tradecraft and they try to apply it to a victim or survivor. They'll say something like, we'll change your route on the way home. Now, that's something that I engage in when I am taking a principal from point A to point B. Because when someone does have resources and they're properly protected, the most likely point of attack for their risk is in or around the vehicle, right? So if you can stop the vehicle, you can successfully attack the principal, the theory goes. So we engage in route planning, we change routes so we're not easily predictable. But the problem with intimate partners, I know everything about you. And most of the times you're still living in the same community that we lived in together. The kids still go to the same school, and a lot of that is just unavoidable. When you have children together, you're not going to be able to pick up and just leave the state, not legally at least. So you're still navigating the same neighborhood, you're still living in the same house, and you tell someone something like, well, take a different route home. That is absolutely meaningless. I don't need to know which route you're driving. I just need to know where you're going to be at a certain time, or I need to know where you're going, and I can sit there and wait. So that type of safety advice is, it's meaningless, but you hear it repeated often.
Yeah, definitely. I'm riveted. I'm just like, oh, wow. And I feel bad because I am a state certified domestic violence advocate. And one of the things is change your route. And I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be a whole new, there's a lot more detail to that.
Change your route is absolutely it's meaningless. It is, in this context, it is largely meaningless. If you're in a confidential location, changing your route doesn't help as much as doing what we call a surveillance detection route, which is, being able to tease out somebody that might be following you. But again, listen, in this day and age, and this is why we engage in the courtroom advocacy that we do, you're in court, somebody can, a PI can slap a GPS on your vehicle. you're never going to know it. Nobody has to follow you anymore. I just need access to your vehicle. So, you know, I'm not saying changing your route has no value, but like a lot of safety advice, it's very contextual and it has its limitations.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Okay, so talking about court, we know that you're in court all the time. What behavior, what have you noticed about abusers in general in the court setting?
Well, one thing that's popped out to me recently is that there seems to be more family and friend support for abusers than there are for victims. I see family showing up and supporting abusers in family court or restraining order hearings, and the victims are often all by themselves. And that's very troubling, obviously, and it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
And the roots of that are probably in a little bit of embarrassment or shame and not wanting to bring people into that theater, right? If you're the victim or the survivor. So I understand that. But, one thing is not just in the courtroom, it's from dealing with hundreds of offenders. Sometimes, sometimes we directly try to engage and manage offenders and take them off the path to violence. So I have a lot of experience dealing with them. And the disconnect always is whenever I interview a new client on a bad case, they think this guy's a unicorn, that he's some special, and they are all the same. They may not do exactly everything the same, but the behaviors, the dynamics, they're all the same. They are absolutely all the same. You could just substitute a different face or a different name, but the dynamics are always the same. And that's really striking.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, so before you talked about a little bit about how background in law enforcement doesn't make a great security expert. So I wanted to know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but also what does make a really good security expert?
Having a formal background in security and security training, knowing how to do assessments, knowing how to assess vulnerabilities, knowing the proper mitigations for those vulnerabilities. And when it comes to that personal protection, right, there is physical security, the security of buildings and premises and things like that. But when we're talking about protecting a person, that's really the tradecraft or the domain of executive and dignitary protection. And that is its own specialized training. It is a separate continuum, and policing has nothing to do with that. Now, you listen, if you do more than sit in a car for 20 years and write tickets, and maybe you're engaged in investigations and things like that, you're going to see crime over and over again, and you're going to be able to pick some low-hanging fruit. And again, we work closely with law enforcement. This is not a knock on law enforcement. It is just a fact. They don't have any formal security training. So unfortunately, they're often called upon within their communities to give safety advice. Not all of it is bad. Generic safety advice from them is often good. Lock your doors, put good locks on your doors, reinforce your frames, and they can tell you about burglaries and such. But when it comes to this path to violence, when an offender is on the hunt and is thinking about making the next one of several thousand fatalities we have in the United States a year, that is a completely different analysis and a completely different tradecraft that they have no training in whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about healthy relationships. And I noticed, and I think a lot of us noticed who know your content on TikTok, that you started doing stuff with your young daughter about healthy relationships. So why did you start doing that with her? And who do you think also ends up getting educated?
Well, number one, she loves to do it, right? She likes to do it with me. She's always bugging me for, what's the lesson for today, Papa?
Right,
And
right.
it just, it served a couple purposes for me. Number one, it served for me to engage with her, on a playful level, but also a serious level, teaching these lessons and reinforcing the dialogue that we're supposed to have with our children, but we don't necessarily have. I think we sometimes think they get it through osmosis. And, I think that healthy relationship talk is, specific education that we need in our families, and we need it in our schools, because it's not just for the relationships. It extends out to consent and sexual assault and rape and all those heinous crimes. So those are boundaries and principles and dynamics that I think children need to learn from a young age. And they're never too young. Listen, the minute they start making a friend, they are involved in a relationship, and they can be 2, 3, 4 years old. And of course you can start teaching boundaries then, and what healthy boundaries are. So that, and the fact that she's cute, right? So she's going to get views. So, she is also a tool to get that message out wider. And I think that, mostly, parents might be scrolling through their TikTok and they see us talking and they're like, oh, you know what, you're right. And, it's meant to spark a dialogue or a conversation with those people that are open to it. We digest so much information every day. And, God, there's content out there teaching you how to be wealthy if you want to follow all the steps. But if you're not ready, if you're not in the right frame of mind to execute and to execute on that information, it's worthless. So all you hope to do is cast a wide net and spark a dialogue where you can. And people, they're ready for a teacher when they're ready, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely. How old is she, by the way?
She's 6. She just turned 6. She just had a birthday. Big
happy birthday
party with pink and balloons and cake and kids from school. She had a good time. Good.
Okay, so how do people find you? How can people access your services or follow your content?
You know what? I'm bad at this because I don't have our hotline. I don't have our hotline memorized.
Then tell us your TikTok account, your Instagram handle. I don't know. It doesn't look like you put the same stuff on TikTok. Looks like you do more on TikTok than Instagram. So tell us just about that.
Instagram, I don't know. I haven't figured it out, but I have a big following on Facebook. So there's my personal profile on Facebook. The organization Protection from Abuse has a page. So I cross-share information on there. And I even have a safety group on Facebook called Women's Safety TV. With about 10,000 members and growing. And there's a sister account on Instagram, Women's Safety TV, not a lot of traffic there. And then I have my personal TikTok page. But for our services, they can reach out through Protection from Abuse on the social media page on Facebook. We routinely share, we have a confidential safety chat line with a QR code. And we routinely, that is routinely on our timeline on Protection from Abuse. So all they have to do is scan that QR code. That opens up a confidential chat to talk about safety and things of that nature. And then we have our hotline number, which I'm ashamed to say I don't have it committed to memory.
Send it, I'm going to post this recording right after. So just send it to me and then we'll get in there or put it in the comments after this is posted. Here's the hotline number I was talking about, and then people can see it.
And it's not literally that I don't know it. I just want to be sure. I don't want to be the one that missed, got one number wrong. But
yeah, send it later. It's fine. No problem.
Yeah.
You did really well this whole other with everything else. So you're totally excused from the hotline.
I'm so used to handing out the card,
right.
Or, we a lot of people are referred to us through the prosecutor's offices or other, victim service agencies. So it's not often that I'm speaking and I say the number, and I find that I always have to double check, and I don't have a card in front of me, unfortunately. But
okay, well, here's a simple question for you that I think I know the answer to, but I'll make positive. What's your TikTok handle name?
I think it's The Bodyguard, right?
I thought it was Steve the Bodyguard.
It probably is. I'll trust you on that. Because I see a question there from Raw Honeypot TikTok handle.
Yeah, I think it's Steve the Bodyguard.
Do you see how bad I am at this promotion, this self-promotion? I don't, I'm supposed to have.
That's because your priorities are in more important areas. So that's fine. That's fine.
They are. I'm constantly.
All right, my partner's saying we'll put his contact info in the permanent post. Yeah, so we're gonna, when we finally get this up on YouTube, which who knows how long that'll take, then we'll put it there. But we definitely will get it Instagram and we'll put it in TikTok too.
And you were mentioning you were a domestic violence advocate?
Yeah. I was trained, through the YWCA.
Rutgers, I don't know if there's any advocates watching, but I teach other advocates safety planning. And Rutgers University has their School of Social Work. They have a New Jersey Victim Assistance Academy where they have various training programs, and those are free. And for Rutgers, I teach advanced safety planning. And
That is excellent.
yeah.
Excellent. I mean, when I got certified years ago, I had no idea that I was going to turn it into anything. I just thought it was fascinating and I wanted to learn more. And actually what got me into it was that lethal assessment training test,
Right.
or the test when they did it. And so one of the things was, if you were high risk, the police really encouraged you right on the spot to get on the phone with a domestic violence advocate, because they wanted to try and get you in there. So I did, and then it just turned into a whole other thing.
And I'm glad you brought that up again. I think, it's important to understand. A lot of people don't, and this is where there's this separation between people that maybe train to the instrument, like police officers, they use the instrument, but they don't actually understand what risk assessment is and isn't. And it's important to understand, and I explain it to clients like this: we can't predict the future, right? And risk assessment is not predictive for individuals. It's called, in risk assessment circles, it's called an ecological fallacy. We can predict risk for groups. We can't predict it for individuals. And the best analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, but the best analogy that I've come up with that I think most people can understand is, if you drive a car, you pay premium for your insurance. Not everybody pays the same premium. So what the insurance company has done, based on your driving record, where you live, what type of car you have, what your gender is, and even your age, and sometimes even your credit score, they set your premium by those variables. That, in essence, is, in a large sense, is a risk assessment. Now, if you have a kid that's 21 years old and he somehow lucked into a Corvette and he's got a bunch of speeding tickets and maybe even has a DUI, he's going to have a high insurance premium. However, that does not mean he's going to get into an accident tomorrow or even ever. It just means that when you put him and people that are similarly situated to him, that group is going to experience bad outcomes at a much higher rate than the other groups. The same applies for domestic violence risk assessment. And I'm happy to say that, after having done thousands, if they were predictive, I mean, I've had a good percentage that are at that high score, and we haven't lost anybody. So, if they were predictive, and I'm not saying, I'm almost reluctant to say this, but in my opinion, there's two mistakes, especially when we're dealing with people that have suffered trauma. We don't want to overestimate risk, and we don't want to underestimate risk. We want to evaluate it properly in the proper context, and we want to react appropriately to it. So, telling someone they're going to die tomorrow, or letting them think that this person is going to kill you, is not always that's rarely the right approach, unless we have some very obvious signs that that person is on a path to violence. You can have those behaviors, but that doesn't necessarily, you can have the behaviors that will give you a high score on a lethality assessment. That doesn't necessarily mean that person's on a path to commit that ultimate act of violence. And that can be very difficult to distinguish. So it's important to remember what a risk assessment can do and what it can't do. But my advice to any woman that's engaged in that process or has had a risk assessment is to obey that risk. You assume that you are in that type of danger until proven otherwise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Better safe than sorry.
Yes, until, like I said, until proven otherwise. And that's why the whole safety planning process is so important, because it's not a one-time deal. Risk is, another analogy I like to use is, you might have done a lethality assessment yesterday. That's like for people that remember Polaroids, right? Or a selfie. That's a selfie. Just because it looks like that today doesn't mean that's what you look like tomorrow. So risk can go up and down as circumstances change, and vulnerabilities change over time. The offender may change over time depending on what's going on, the dynamics of the breakup, or what's going on in divorce court, or with restraining orders. There are things along that path after the breakup that can escalate violence or be triggers to violence. So, or there are protective factors. Somebody that was on drugs or alcohol may have gotten help, and that's a protective factor. Maybe they were unemployed and they got a good job. That's a protective factor. Maybe they, this is a common, they moved on to a new supply. I don't know that I like that phrase, but generally speaking, moving on to someone else and being in another relationship is a protective factor for that other survivor. So, it is a complex landscape that requires, the analysis and the input of a professional.
Yeah. Well, very, very impressive. Someone had asked before a little while ago about I think they were asking about your Facebook groups. Is it free to join the Facebook group or to do the, this? Okay. All right, great.
Women's
And then
Safety TV.
Say it again.
Women's Safety TV it's an open group on Facebook. Yep.
Good. All right. So Women's Safety TV, protection from abuse, Steve the Bodyguard, probably on TikTok.
Probably.
And the bodyguard.official on Instagram.
Right.
And you are going to send us your hotline number.
Yes. And
we're going to put it in the comments.
I'll share the photo with the QR code to open up our domestic violence safety chat line. And that's a national, that's national in scope. And that's something that we're growing and pushing to be a big national program on par with the domestic violence hotline, if you will, because everybody needs access in that situation to good safety advice. And we are certifying advocates, training them to be properly trained to engage in that process and giving them the necessary background and the tools to do it properly.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And thanks for taking the time to come on and answer these questions. I'm going to repost the recording, and I'm going to take lots of snippets and clips and put them all over TikTok and wherever we can, we get someone to help us start doing social media.
Okay. Well, tag me, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat about this very important subject.
All right. So we'll do it again.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.